I'm Madison, 28, and I thought I knew my family until Christmas morning when my parents handed me an eviction notice instead of presents. You need to be out by New Year's, my mother said coldly, while my golden child brother Jake smirked from the couch. What they didn't know was that the house they were kicking me out of, I owned it. I'd been secretly paying the mortgage for 3 years after Dad lost his job. 1 month later, when I told them the house is sold, their faces went white as fresh snow. Hey everyone, before we dive into this wild family drama that'll make your jaw drop, I'm curious. Are you watching from your cozy living room, maybe while sipping some hot cocoa? Or are you sneaking this video in at work like I used to do? Drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you're ready for a story about family betrayal that hits harder than a Christmas coal delivery, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this revenge tale is about to get absolutely insane. Trust me, you won't see this twist coming. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began, because the foundation of this betrayal was built over years, not days. 3 years ago, my father lost his construction job when the company downsized. Mom worked part-time at a local bookstore, barely bringing in enough to cover groceries. I was fresh out of college with a decent marketing job, living at home to save money while I figured out my next move. That's when the mortgage notices started arriving. I saw them stuffed in kitchen drawers, hidden behind bills crumpled in trash cans. My parents were drowning, but their pride wouldn't let them admit it. Dad would disappear for hours, supposedly job hunting, but I knew he was driving around town too ashamed to come home and face reality. Mom pretended everything was fine, humming while she cooked dinner, but I caught her crying over the bills when she thought nobody was looking. The foreclosure notice was the final straw. I found it tucked under a stack of magazines stamped with red letters that screamed "Final Notice." They were 60 days away from losing the house I grew up in. The house where Mom planted her rose garden, where Dad built that crooked treehouse in the backyard, where every Christmas morning had been magical until that moment. I couldn't let them lose it. But I also knew they'd never accept help directly. Dad's pride was legendary in our family. The man once walked 5 miles home instead of accepting a ride from a neighbor because he didn't want to seem needy. So I came up with a plan that seemed perfect at the time. I went to the bank and worked out a deal to transfer the mortgage into my name. It wasn't easy. I had to prove income, provide bank statements, jump through countless hoops. But eventually, the paperwork went through. I became the legal owner of 1247 Maple Street, the house my parents thought they still owned. I told them I'd negotiated with the bank for them, that my good credit had helped them get a payment extension and modified terms. They were so relieved they didn't ask too many questions. Dad actually cried. The only time I'd seen him shed tears since his own father died. Mom hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe, whispering thank you over and over into my hair. For 3 years, I made those mortgage payments religiously. $847 every month, plus property taxes and insurance. It wasn't easy on my salary. But watching my parents relax, seeing Dad's shoulders lose that defeated slump, hearing Mom humming real songs instead of nervous tunes, it was worth every penny. I never told them the truth. I figured someday, maybe when I got married or moved out permanently, I'd transfer it back to them or sell it and give them the money. It was supposed to be a temporary solution, a bridge to get them back on their feet. Meanwhile, Jake, my older brother by 2 years, had been living his best life in Denver, working some tech job that paid well enough for him to lease a BMW and rent a trendy downtown apartment. He visited maybe twice a year, always, with stories about his latest vacation or expensive purchase. Mom and Dad adored him, their successful son who'd made it in the big city. Jake never contributed a dime to the household, never asked how they were managing financially, never noticed that Dad looked older, more worn down, or that Mom had stopped buying name-brand groceries. He just breezed in with his designer clothes and confident smile, basking in their pride, while I quietly kept their world from falling apart. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was the daughter who stayed close, who helped without being asked, who sacrificed her own financial freedom to keep the family home safe. But I was also the one they took for granted. Jake was the golden child, the one whose phone calls were celebrated, whose visits were planned weeks in advance like royal appearances. I told myself it didn't matter. Family isn't about keeping score, right? I was helping because I loved them, not because I wanted recognition or gratitude. I was content being the reliable daughter, the one they could count on without question. But as the months turned into years, something started to shift. Jake's visits became performances where he'd regale them with stories of his success while barely acknowledging my presence. He'd make subtle digs about me still living at home, not knowing I was the reason there was still a home to live in. My parents would laugh along, proud of their successful son and apparently oblivious to the hurt in their daughter's eyes. The worst part was how they started treating me like a burden instead of a blessing. Comments about when I was going to get my own place became more frequent. Suggestions that I was too comfortable at home, that I needed to spread my wings, all while I was literally paying for the roof over their heads. I started keeping records of everything. Every payment, every conversation, every small slight that chipped away at my confidence. I told myself it was just for organization, for tax purposes. I didn't realize I was building a case file for the eventual explosion that would tear our family apart. The house became my secret burden and my secret power. Every month when I transferred that money, I felt both proud and resentful. Proud that I could take care of my family, resentful that they didn't even know I was doing it. It was a weight I carried alone, and it was getting heavier every single day. If I'd known where this road would lead, would I have made different choices? Would I have let them lose the house and face their financial reality? Part of me thinks yes, but the truth is I loved them too much to let them fall. I just never imagined they'd push me off the cliff instead. Everything changed the week before Thanksgiving, when Jake called with his amazing news. I was in the kitchen helping Mom prep vegetables when her phone rang, and her face lit up like it was Christmas morning. "Jake, oh honey, how are you?" she practically sang into the phone. I watched her expression transform from joy to shock to something that looked almost like worship. "You're kidding! Oh my God, that's wonderful. Wait, let me put you on speaker so Dad can hear this." Dad rushed in from the living room, wiping his hands on a dish towel, grinning before he even knew what he was grinning about. That's the effect Jake had on our parents. Just his voice could brighten their entire day. "Tell your father what you just told me," Mom commanded, practically bouncing with excitement. Jake's voice filled the kitchen, smooth and confident as always. "Hey, Dad, so I just got promoted to senior product manager, which comes with a massive raise. But here's the really big news. Sarah and I are engaged." The explosion of joy that followed was deafening. Mom screamed, actually screamed, and started crying happy tears. Dad whooped and started pacing around the kitchen like he'd won the lottery himself. They were so caught up in their celebration that they barely noticed me standing there still holding a half-peeled potato. "When's the wedding? Have you set a date?" "Oh, we need to start planning." "Is Sarah's family nice? Where will you have it? What can we do to help?" Mom rapid-fired questions like a excited machine gun. "Well, that's the thing," Jake continued, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "We want to have the engagement party at the house for Christmas. Sarah's never seen where I grew up, and I've been bragging about Mom's cooking and Dad's stories. We're thinking Christmas Eve, maybe 30 or 40 people." I watched my parents' faces fall slightly. They exchanged one of those married couple looks that communicate volumes without words. The look that said, "We can't afford this, but we can't disappoint him." "Of course, sweetheart," Mom said, her voice bright but strained. "We'll make it perfect, won't we, honey?" Dad nodded enthusiastically, but I caught him glancing toward the drawer where they used to hide the bills. "Absolutely. It'll be the best party this street has ever seen." After they hung up, the planning began immediately. Mom pulled out notebooks and started making lists. Catering decorations, flowers, cleaning services. Dad talked about renting tables and chairs, maybe hiring a bartender. The numbers they were throwing around made my stomach clench. Mom, I said carefully, this sounds expensive. Maybe we could keep it simple. I could cook. We could do decorations ourselves. She waved me off dismissively. Madison, this is Jake's engagement party. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event. We're not going to cheap out on our son's future. But maybe your brother deserves the best, Dad interrupted firmly. We'll figure out the money. That's not your concern. Except it literally was my concern because I was the one paying the mortgage they didn't know about. And now they were planning to go into debt for a party to celebrate the son who'd never contributed a penny to the household. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of preparation that made my head spin and my bank account weep. Mom hired a catering company, ordered professional flowers, bought new furniture for the living room so everything looks perfect for Sarah's first visit. Dad rented a sound system and hired his friend's cleaning service. Meanwhile, I was designated as the unpaid help. I addressed invitations, picked up rentals, coordinated with vendors, and basically became their personal assistant for Jake's party. Every suggestion I made to save money was shot down. Every offer to contribute my own money was refused with "we've got it handled," even though I could see the stress lines deepening around Dad's eyes. The worst part was listening to them gush about Jake to anyone who would listen. The mailman heard about his promotion. The grocery store clerk learned about his engagement. The neighbors got detailed updates about his success and his wonderful fiancée. I started to feel invisible in my own home, or rather in the home I was secretly paying for. Jake arrived 3 days before Christmas with Sarah in tow. She was everything I'd expected. Blonde, bubbly, and wearing a coat that probably cost more than my monthly salary. They pulled up in a rental Mercedes because of course they did. The reunion was like watching a movie. Mom cried Dad bear-hugged Jake for a full minute and everyone acted like he'd returned from war instead of just flying in from Denver. Sarah was sweet enough complimenting everything from Mom's cooking to Dad's jokes, but I could see her taking mental notes about the house's outdated fixtures and modest furnishings. Madison Jake finally acknowledged me after 20 minutes of family worship. Still living at home, I see. When are you going to get your own place and stop mooching off Mom and Dad? The words hit me like a physical blow. Mom and Dad laughed like it was the funniest joke they'd ever heard. Sarah looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. I forced a smile and mumbled something about saving money, but inside I was screaming. That night I lay in bed listening to them talk downstairs. Jake was regaling them with stories of his apartment, his job, his amazing life in Denver. I heard him say, "You guys should really think about downsizing. This house is way too big for 2 people and the maintenance costs must be killing you." "Oh, we manage just fine," Dad said, but his voice had that strained quality it got when he was pretending everything was okay. "I'm just saying you could sell this place, buy a nice condo, and have money left over for retirement. Or travel. When's the last time you two went on vacation?" I pressed my pillow over my ears, but I couldn't block out the sound of my parents agreeing that, yes, maybe they should think about their options. The son who'd never paid a bill was giving them financial advice about the house I owned. That's when I started to realize that this Christmas was going to change everything. I just had no idea how brutal the change would be. Christmas Eve was everything Mom had dreamed of and more. The party was flawless, elegant decorations, delicious food, and Jake and Sarah holding court like the royal couple they clearly thought they were. I spent the evening refilling drinks, clearing plates, and watching my parents beam with pride as their guests praised their successful son. Sarah's engagement ring caught the light from every angle, a massive diamond that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. She and Jake told the story of his proposal at least a dozen times, each version more elaborate than the last. My parents hung on every word like it was scripture. "You must be so proud of Jake," one of Mom's friends said to me while I was collecting empty glasses. He's done so well for himself. I smiled and nodded, but inside, I was thinking about the mortgage payment I'd made just 2 weeks ago. The payment that kept this party venue standing. The payment that let my parents host this celebration of their successful son while their unsuccessful daughter cleaned up after everyone. After the last guest left, we all collapsed in the living room. Mom was glowing with satisfaction, Dad was buzzing with excitement, and Jake was holding court about how perfect everything had been. Sarah was scrolling through photos on her phone, already planning to post them on social media. Seriously, Mom and Dad, that was incredible, Jake said. Sarah's parents are going to be so impressed when they see the pictures. You guys really outdid yourselves. I watched my parents practically melt with happiness. They'd pulled out all the stops for their golden child, and his approval meant everything to them. Never mind that they'd probably maxed out their credit cards to pay for it. Never mind that I'd been running around all evening making sure everything was perfect while they basked in the compliments. We just want the best for you, sweetheart, Mom said, reaching over to squeeze Jake's hand. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Speaking of which, Dad said, sitting forward with renewed energy, we've been thinking about your suggestion, about downsizing. My blood turned to ice. I hadn't expected this conversation to happen so quickly or so casually. Jake perked up immediately. Really? That's great. You guys could make a fortune selling this place. The market's insane right now. We've actually been looking at some condos online, Mom admitted. There's a beautiful complex about 20 minutes from here. Much easier to maintain great amenities. And no more worrying about the roof or the furnace or the yard work, Dad added. We could actually enjoy retirement instead of constantly fixing things. Sarah looked up from her phone. That sounds amazing. You guys deserve to enjoy yourselves. I sat there in stunned silence, watching my family plan to sell the house I owned. The house I'd been secretly paying for. The house I'd saved from foreclosure. The casual way they discussed it, like it was completely their decision to make, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. What do you think, Madison? Jake asked suddenly, and all eyes turned to me. Don't you think it's time Mom and Dad moved somewhere more suitable? I could barely speak. I. I think they should do whatever makes them happy. Exactly, Mom said brightly. And honestly, sweetheart, this might be good timing for you too. It's probably time you found your own place anyway. You can't live here forever. The words hit me like a slap. After everything I'd done, after 3 years of secretly keeping them afloat, they were essentially telling me I was overstaying my welcome in the house I owned. Mom's right, Jake chimed in. You're 28, Maddie. Most people your age have been out on their own for years. It'll be good for you to finally experience real independence. Real independence. From the man who'd never paid a single bill in this house. Who'd lived off our parents' generosity throughout college and beyond. Who was now dispensing life advice while sitting in the living room I'd kept in the family. Christmas morning dawned gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. We gathered around the tree for our traditional present exchange, but the atmosphere felt different. There was an undercurrent of excitement from my parents and Jake that had nothing to do with gifts and everything to do with their grand plans for the future. I watched them open presents with forced enthusiasm. Jake gave Mom and Dad a fancy coffee maker that probably cost more than their monthly grocery budget. They gave him a watch that I knew they couldn't afford. Sarah received earrings from Mom that matched her engagement ring perfectly. Then Jake stood up wearing the biggest grin I'd ever seen on his face. Actually, I have one more present. For everyone. He disappeared upstairs and came back with an official-looking folder. My parents looked confused, but excited. Sarah was practically bouncing in her seat. So Jake began dramatically, I've been thinking about everything we discussed last night. About downsizing, about new beginnings, about what's best for everyone. He opened the folder and pulled out some papers. Sarah and I want to help you guys with your transition. We want to buy the house. The silence in the room was deafening. Mom's mouth fell open. Dad looked stunned. Sarah was beaming like she'd just solved world hunger. We've already talked to a realtor, friend of mine in Denver, Jake continued, clearly enjoying his moment in the spotlight. He thinks we can get at least $400,000 for this place, maybe more. We'll pay you the full market value you can buy that condo you were looking at, and Sarah and I will have a beautiful house for when we decide to move back east. Mom started crying happy tears again. Dad stood up and hugged Jake so hard I thought he might break him. It was like watching a family celebration happening in a different language, one I didn't understand. There's just one small thing, Jake said, and his tone shifted slightly. We'd want to take possession pretty quickly, like by New Year's. That way, you can start fresh with the new year and we can start making some updates before our wedding. That's when Mom turned to me, her face full of sympathy that felt like acid. Oh, sweetheart, I know this is sudden, but she pulled an envelope from under the tree. An envelope with my name on it in her handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. It was an eviction notice, typed official and signed by both my parents. We need you to be out by January 1st, Dad said gently, like he was delivering a cancer diagnosis. I know it's fast, but Jake and Sarah need time to prepare the house for their new life together. I stared at the paper, reading the words over and over. 30 days' notice to vacate the premises. The premises I owned. The house I'd been paying for while they planned my exile. We've already looked into some nice apartments for you, Mom added quickly. There are several in your price range, and really, honey, it's time. You need to start your own life. Jake was watching me with a smug expression that made my skin crawl. Don't look so shocked, Maddie. You had to know this day would come eventually. I looked around the room at my family. The family I'd sacrificed for the family I'd protected, the family that was now kicking me out of my own house to make room for their golden child. That's when I realized something that would change everything. They had no idea what they'd just done. But I'm someone who believes that karma has perfect timing, and right now I can feel some of you getting as angry as I was in that moment. If this story is hitting you right in the feels, take a second to smash that like button, because trust me, what happens next is going to blow your mind. And if you're thinking this can't possibly get crazier, hit that subscribe button because you clearly don't know how deep family betrayal can go. The revenge that's coming, it's going to be absolutely perfect. I sat there holding that eviction notice, my hands trembling with a mixture of rage and disbelief that I'd never experienced before. My family was chattering excitedly around me, making plans for their future in my house, completely oblivious to the nuclear bomb I was sitting on. Madison, aren't you excited for us? Sarah asked sweetly, probably noticing my shell-shocked expression. This is going to be such a beautiful home for our family someday. I looked at her perfectly manicured hands gesturing around the living room, talking about our family and our home. The home I'd been paying for while she was probably getting weekly manicures in Denver. You seem upset, sweetheart, Mom said, reaching over to pat my knee. I know change is hard, but this is really what's best for everyone. You'll see. What's best for everyone. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. What would have been best for everyone was if they'd known the truth from the beginning. What would have been best was if they'd appreciated the daughter who sacrificed her financial freedom to save their home, instead of worshiping the son who'd never contributed a dime. Actually, I said, quietly standing up from the couch, I need to show you all something. I went to my room and pulled out the folder I'd been keeping for 3 years. Every mortgage statement, every payment confirmation, every piece of documentation that proved what I'd been doing. My hands were surprisingly steady as I carried it back downstairs. Before we go any further with these plans, I said, setting the folder on the coffee table, there's something you need to know about this house. Jake rolled his eyes. Madison, whatever it is, can wait. We're trying to plan something important here. No, Jake, this can't wait. I opened the folder and pulled out the mortgage documents. This house isn't yours to sell. The confusion on their faces would have been comical if my heart wasn't breaking into 1,000 pieces. What are you talking about? Dad asked, looking genuinely puzzled. I took a deep breath and dropped the bomb that would change everything. I own this house. I've owned it for 3 years. I'm the one who's been paying the mortgage since you got the foreclosure notice. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the neighbor's dog barking 3 houses down. That's impossible, Mom whispered. I pulled out the deed transfer documents, the payment history, the bank statements. When Dad lost his job, you were 60 days from foreclosure. I saw the notice. So I went to the bank, qualified for the loan transfer, and took over the mortgage. I've been paying $847 every month for 3 years. Jake snatched the papers from the table, his face going white as he read. Sarah peered over his shoulder, her mouth falling open. My parents sat frozen like their brains couldn't process what they were hearing. This has to be fake, Jake said desperately. Madison, this isn't funny. I pulled out my phone and showed them my banking app scrolling through 3 years of mortgage payments. December 15th, $847 to First National Mortgage. November 15th, $847. October 15th. Stop, Mom whispered, tears starting to fall. But these weren't happy tears. So when you say you want to sell the house, I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word. You're talking about selling my house. When you hand me an eviction notice, you're trying to evict me from property I own. And when Jake talks about buying it from you, he's talking about buying something that was never yours to sell. Dad's face had gone from confusion to horror to something that looked like shame. Madison, we had no idea. Why didn't you tell us? Because you never would have accepted help. I exploded, 3 years of frustration finally boiling over. Dad, you wouldn't even let the neighbors give you a ride. You think you would have let your daughter take over your mortgage. But sweetheart, Mom started, we thought. You thought what? That the bank just magically decided to give you a break, that your financial problems just disappeared on their own. For 3 years I've been keeping this family afloat while you treated me like a burden. Jake was still staring at the paperwork, his grand gesture crumbling before his eyes. This doesn't make sense. If you own the house, why didn't you say something sooner? Because I love this family, I shouted. Because I wanted to protect you, because I thought that's what families did for each other, but apparently I was wrong about what this family thinks of me. The room fell silent again. Sarah looked like she wanted to disappear into the couch. My parents were crying now, the weight of their mistake finally hitting them. Jake just sat there holding papers that proved his sister had been the family hero while he'd been playing the role of conquering prince. Madison, Dad said slowly, "We owe you the biggest apology of our lives." An apology, I laughed bitterly. Dad, you just handed me an eviction notice for my own house, so your golden child could buy it from you with money he's never had to spend on family before. We didn't know, Mom sobbed. Oh God, Madison, we didn't know. No, you didn't know because you never asked. For 3 years, you never wondered how your financial problems just magically solved themselves. You never questioned why the bank suddenly became so generous. You just accepted it and moved on because it was easier than facing reality. I started gathering up the papers, my decision crystallizing with each document I touched. Jake, since you're so eager to buy this house, you can buy it from its actual owner. Me. 400,000 sounds fair, doesn't it, Madison, please? Jake started, but I cut him off. But you know what? I don't think I want to sell to someone who thinks I'm a mooch. Someone who's never contributed to this household but feels qualified to give lectures about independence. I looked around the room at my family. The family that had just tried to kick me out of my own home. I need some time to think about what I want to do next. And I think you all need some time to think about what just happened here. I headed toward the stairs, then turned back one more time. Oh, and Jake, you might want to cancel that realtor friend of yours. This house isn't going anywhere until I decide what to do with it. The last thing I saw before going to my room was 4 faces staring at me in complete shock, finally understanding that the daughter they'd overlooked was the one who'd been holding their world together all along. The next few days were the most uncomfortable of my entire life. The house that had always been my sanctuary became a minefield of awkward encounters and hushed conversations. Jake and Sarah had extended their stay, supposedly to work things out, but really because their entire plan had imploded spectacularly. I'd wake up each morning to find my parents hovering in the kitchen looking like they hadn't slept. They'd try to start conversations that went nowhere, apologies that felt hollow, explanations that only made things worse. "We were just trying to help Jake get started," Mom said on the second day. "We thought it would be good for everyone." Good for everyone except the daughter who'd been footing the bill. Jake avoided me completely for the first 48 hours, which was fine by me. When we finally crossed paths in the hallway, he mumbled something that might have been an apology before disappearing back into his childhood bedroom. Sarah spent most of her time on the phone with friends back in Denver, probably explaining why their house buying plans had suddenly evaporated. The worst part was the constant stream of phone calls. Apparently, word had gotten out about Christmas morning's dramatic revelations, probably through one of the party guests who'd heard raised voices. Family, friends called to check in, neighbors stopped by with transparent excuses, and even my aunt from California somehow heard the story and called to get the details. Everyone wanted to know how I'd kept such a massive secret for 3 years. How my parents could have not known. Whether we were going to work things out. I started letting calls go to voicemail and avoiding the front windows when I saw people approaching the door. On December 28th, I was in my room working on my laptop when I heard a soft knock. "Madison, can I come in?" It was Dad. I looked up to see him standing in my doorway, looking older than I'd ever seen him. The confident man who'd hugged Jake at Christmas had been replaced by someone who seemed to have aged a decade in 3 days. "I've been thinking," he said, sitting heavily in my desk chair, "about what you did for us, about what we did to you. And I need to tell you something." I closed my laptop and waited. "I knew," he said quietly. Not consciously, but some part of me knew something wasn't right. The bank doesn't just give people breaks like that. Financial problems don't just disappear. But I didn't want to look too closely because I was scared of what I'd find. His confession hit me harder than I'd expected. "Dad." "No, let me finish. Your mother and I, we took the easy way out. We let ourselves believe a fairy tale because it was easier than facing the truth. And we took you for granted because you made it easy to do that." He looked around my childhood bedroom, taking in the participation trophies and old photos, the remnants of the daughter they'd overlooked. Jake was always the easy kid to love. He was successful, confident, charming. Loving him felt simple. But you were always the one actually doing the work, quietly without asking for credit or recognition. "I didn't do it for recognition," I said softly. "I know. That's what makes this so much worse." He stood up and walked to my window, looking out at the yard where he'd taught both of his children to ride bikes. "I failed you, Madison. We both did. We failed you as parents, and we failed you as people." I felt tears starting to form. "Dad, I just wanted to help. And you did. You saved us. You saved this house, our dignity, our future. And we repaid you by trying to kick you out so your brother could play house." He turned back to me, his own eyes wet. "I don't know how to make this right." "I don't either," I admitted. That evening, Mom knocked on my door. She had a cup of tea and a plate of cookies, my favorites from childhood. She sat on my bed like she used to when I was little, and had a bad day at school. "I keep thinking about that day 3 years ago," she said. "When you told us you'd worked something out with the bank, you were so calm, so confident. You made it sound simple." "It wasn't simple," I said. "It was terrifying. I was 25 years old, taking on a mortgage I wasn't sure I could afford, lying to my parents for the first time in my life." "Why did you do it?" I thought about that question for a long time. "Because I couldn't bear the thought of you losing the house. Because Dad looked so defeated, and you were pretending everything was fine when it obviously wasn't. Because I loved you enough to sacrifice my own financial future. Mom started crying, then soft tears that she tried to wipe away with her sleeve. And we thanked you by treating you like a failure, by comparing you to Jake, by making you feel like you weren't good enough. It did hurt, I admitted, especially when Jake would make comments about me living at home, not knowing I was the reason there was still a home to live in. He feels terrible, Mom said quickly. He's been beating himself up for days. Good, I said, and I meant it. On December 30th, Jake finally worked up the courage to have a real conversation with me. I was in the kitchen making coffee when he appeared looking uncharacteristically humble. "I've been an ass," he said without preamble. "Yes, you have," I agreed. "For years, not just this week. I've been condescending and dismissive and completely oblivious to what you've been doing for this family." I poured my coffee and waited for him to continue. "Sarah and I are going back to Denver tomorrow," he said. "We're going to start looking for our own house there. I think it's time I stopped expecting Mom and Dad to treat me like I'm still 12 years old." "That's probably a good idea." "Madison," he said, and his voice cracked slightly. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry for every stupid comment I made about you living at home. I'm sorry for taking credit for success I didn't earn. I'm sorry for not seeing how incredible you are." I looked at my brother, really looked at him, for the first time in years. Underneath the arrogance and entitlement, I could see the little boy who used to build blanket forts with me. "I'm sorry too," I said finally, "for keeping secrets, for letting resentment build up instead of talking to you." "So what happens now?" he asked. I took a sip of my coffee and considered the question that had been keeping me awake for 3 nights. Now I decide what I want to do with my house. January 1st arrived with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I woke up in my own house, and for the first time in 3 years it truly felt like my house, with a decision that felt absolutely right. I found my parents in the kitchen quietly drinking coffee and reading the newspaper. They looked up when I entered, hope and anxiety warring on their faces. "I've made some decisions," I announced, pouring myself a cup of coffee and joining them at the table. "Whatever you decide, honey, we'll understand," Mom said quickly. "If you want us to move out, if you want to sell, if you never want to see us again." "Mom, stop." I held up my hand. "First decision, you're not going anywhere. This is your home, and I want it to stay that way." The relief on their faces was immediate and profound. But I continued, and they tensed again. "Things are going to change around here. No more secrets, no more pride getting in the way of honesty, and no more taking anyone for granted." "What do you mean, Dad?" asked. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared the night before. "I mean, we're going to make this official. You're going to pay me rent. Reasonable rent, but rent nonetheless. We're going to split utilities and household expenses fairly. And most importantly, we're all going to contribute to making this house a home instead of taking it for granted." I slid the papers across the table. It was a formal rental agreement drawn up with the help of a lawyer friend. Fair market rent for their portion of the house, clearly defined responsibilities, mutual respect clauses. "Madison," Mom said, reading through the contract, "this is so generous. The rent you're asking is barely half what we'd pay for that condo." "I'm not doing this to punish you," I explained. "I'm doing this because I want us to have a relationship built on honesty and mutual respect, not on secrets and assumptions." Dad signed first, his hands steady and confident. Mom followed, tears in her eyes, but smiling. For the first time in months, they looked like partners instead of victims of circumstance. "There's one more thing," I said, pulling out my phone. "I got a call yesterday from a production company. Apparently, someone posted our story on Reddit, and it went viral. They want to feature our family on a show about financial secrets and second chances." My parents looked shocked. "Madison, we couldn't possibly. The compensation would be substantial," I interrupted. "Enough to fully pay off the mortgage and leave us all in a much better financial position." But I told them I'd only consider it if we all agreed. This is our story, not just mine. We talked for hours about the pros and cons, the invasion of privacy versus the financial freedom. In the end, we decided to do it. Not for the money, though, that was nice, but because our story had apparently resonated with thousands of people dealing with similar family dynamics. The filming process was intensive but cathartic. We sat in our living room, my living room, and told our story honestly for the first time. Mom cried when she admitted how they'd taken me for granted. Dad's voice broke when he described the shame of losing his job and the relief he'd felt when I negotiated with the bank. The hardest part was Jake's interview conducted via video call from Denver. He owned his mistakes publicly, admitting that he'd been spoiled and entitled, that he'd never appreciated what his sister had sacrificed for the family. Madison taught me that being successful isn't just about what you achieve for yourself, he said to the camera. It's about what you do for the people you love, even when they don't deserve it. When the show aired 6 months later, the response was overwhelming. I received hundreds of messages from people sharing similar stories of family sacrifice and unrecognized contributions. Parents reached out to thank me for inspiring them to appreciate their quiet, reliable children. Siblings wrote to say they'd been motivated to examine their own family dynamics. But the most meaningful response came from Jake. He sent a package to the house, to my house, containing a framed photo from Christmas morning. Not the happy family photo from before the explosion, but one Sarah had taken afterward when we were all crying and processing what had happened. "This is the moment our family started being honest with each other," his note read. "Thank you for having the courage to tell the truth, even when it hurt all of us." The financial freedom from the show allowed me to make the final decision about the house. I officially transferred ownership back to my parents, but with one condition: they had to accept a trust fund I'd established that would ensure they never had to worry about losing their home again. Today, almost 2 years later, our family dinners are different. Jake visits more often, and when he does, he asks about the house maintenance and offers to help with repairs. Sarah has become genuinely sweet, and she always brings flowers from their Denver garden. Mom and Dad treat me like a partner in household decisions, not a child they're responsible for. Most importantly, there are no more secrets. When Dad's arthritis started making yard work difficult, he told us immediately. When Mom wanted to take art classes but worried about the cost, she brought it up at our monthly family meeting. When I got a promotion at work, they celebrated my success with the same enthusiasm they'd always reserved for Jake. The house still holds all our memories, but now it also holds our honesty. The roses Mom planted still bloom every spring. Dad's crooked treehouse still stands in the backyard, and Christmas morning is magical again. But for all the right reasons. You know what strikes me most about this whole experience? How many families probably have similar dynamics without even realizing it? How many quiet, reliable children are overlooked while their flashier siblings get all the attention? How many parents take their steady, dependable kids for granted while celebrating the ones who demand constant admiration? If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear about your own family dynamics in the comments below. Have you ever been the overlooked child? Or maybe you've realized you've been overlooking someone in your own family. Sometimes the people doing the most important work are the ones making the least noise about it. And if you learned something from my family's journey, from secrets to honesty, from taking each other for granted to truly appreciating what we have, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family, forgiveness, and finding your way back to each other. Share this with someone who might need to hear that their quiet contributions matter, that their sacrifices are seen even when it doesn't always feel that way. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply tell the truth, even when it's scary. Family isn't about perfection. It's about showing up for each other, especially when it's hard. Here's to second chances, honest conversations, and the courage to love each other better.